Lucas Reed sat alone in the towering glass office that overlooked the city, the sun setting behind the skyscrapers and casting long shadows over the polished floor. The office was grand, a monument to power, wealth, and control. Expensive paintings lined the walls, leather chairs were scattered across the room, and a crystal chandelier glimmered faintly in the fading light. Despite all the luxury, the air felt cold and empty, heavy with silence, as if the grandeur itself could not warm the emptiness inside Lucas. He had been called many things over the years: ruthless, brilliant, feared. The one thing people whispered most in hushed tones was the same. Lucas Reed had not smiled in 20 years. Not once, not even for a fleeting second, had his lips curved in joy or amusement. Rumors ran wild in the corporate world. Employees told each other stories of his icy stare, how meetings ended in silence because no one dared speak too freely, and how even the happiest events in the office seemed to pass him by like he existed in a different world entirely. And yet, behind his cold gray eyes, there was a shadow of a life he had almost forgotten. Memories that made him shiver at times. Memories he kept locked away behind walls stronger than any fortress. Tonight was no different. The office was quiet, the usual hum of the city below, replaced by the faint sound of the wind against the skyscraper. Lucas leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking slightly beneath his weight, and stared at his reflection in the dark window. The man in the glass looked stern, almost inhuman in his perfection. His jaw tight, his eyes sharp, his posture impeccable. He didn't remember the last time he had allowed himself to feel something pure, something untainted by work or ambition. His life had been a series of calculated decisions, board meetings, and strategic moves, leaving little space for laughter, love, or the soft pleasures of life that others took for granted. Even family had drifted away years ago. Old friends faded, marriages ended, and celebrations became distant memories he could barely recall. It was as though the world had taught him early on that emotions were a weakness, a liability, and in that lesson, Lucas had excelled, achieving fortune and power, but paying the price in solitude. The silence was broken suddenly by the sound of the office door opening. Lucas didn't even flinch. He was accustomed to interruptions, accustomed to employees scurrying in and out with papers or reports. But this time, it wasn't an assistant bringing him memos or a junior executive delivering documents. This time, it was something or rather someone different. Olivia Bennett, the new secretary, stepped in quietly, her presence bright and almost delicate against the stark coldness of the office. She carried herself with an air of calm confidence, smiling politely as she placed a folder on his desk. She had only started a week ago, and already her presence had created a subtle ripple across the office. Lucas observed her silently, not out of curiosity but instinctively, noting how she moved, the slight sway of her hair, the way her eyes scanned the papers before her. Most secretaries in his office had been careful, cold, or afraid to speak, but Olivia was different. There was a warmth about her, a lightness that seemed almost alien in Lucas's world of shadows and strict schedules. Olivia hummed softly as she arranged the documents. The tune light and carefree. Lucas paused, his sharp gaze fixed on her. Though he didn't want to admit that her voice had reached something deep within him, the sound was almost familiar. He shook his head slightly, dismissing the thought, reminding himself that he had no time for distractions, no patience for sentimentality. And yet, as she worked, her song continued, soft, almost playful, filling the space around him. Lucas had not felt the pull of music in decades. Not since a distant childhood memory he had buried deep beneath layers of ambition and duty. He looked away, trying to focus on the numbers and spreadsheets scattered before him, but the melody lingered like a ghost, persistent, gentle, and teasing. Hours passed as Lucas worked, but he found himself glancing up more often than usual, stealing glimpses of Olivia humming, of her tapping a pencil lightly on a stack of papers, of the soft smile she wore without realizing it. It was impossible to ignore. He had no interest in small talk or office gossip, yet something about her presence demanded attention, though he tried to fight it with all the cold discipline he had cultivated over 20 years. She noticed nothing, focused entirely on her work, moving gracefully through the office, treating every task as though it mattered in the grand scheme of life, not just in the world of deadlines and profits. Lucas, who had once been untouchable, began to feel something he had almost forgotten. Curiosity, the faintest flicker of wonder, and a creeping sense of unease, because the sensation was unfamiliar, unsettling, yet somehow welcome. Days turned into a week, and the pattern repeated. Olivia sang softly as she worked, organized files with meticulous care, and smiled at the smallest things, while Lucas watched in silence, fighting against a feeling he had long denied, hope. He wondered why a simple song could reach him so profoundly, why her presence could stir long-forgotten memories of a time when the world had been simpler, when when laughter had been easy and smiles had been genuine. He remembered his mother, long gone, who had once sung him lullabies as a child, whose voice had carried warmth and safety. For a fleeting moment, Lucas felt a pang of longing, a twinge of vulnerability he had not allowed himself in decades. But he quickly buried it, returning to his chair, pretending to be absorbed in work, all the while knowing he was no longer fully in control of his own heart. The office staff had begun to notice the subtle change. Lucas, who had once barely interacted with anyone, now paused in the hallway to glance at Olivia, not out of necessity, but instinct. Rumors began to circulate. Once more was the unshakable, unyielding Lucas Reed beginning to feel something. Employees whispered in corners, yet no one dared approach him directly. The mystery only grew, and Lucas, normally so meticulous about appearances, found himself strangely unconcerned with what others thought. Something about Olivia had broken through the armor of indifference he had built around himself, and the realization both terrified and exhilarated him. One evening, the office empty, Olivia remained behind to finish her tasks. She hummed a soft tune, unaware that Lucas had returned to the office after a late meeting. He leaned against the doorframe, listening quietly, the sound of her song pulling at his soul like a thread tied to the past. This time, he didn't move away, didn't hide in the shadows. He stood there, rooted to the spot, letting the melody wash over him. It was the first time in 20 years that he had allowed himself to simply feel. He remembered moments of happiness, of love, of family. Memories he had thought were lost returned vividly. His mother's laughter, his father's rare smiles, his own childhood innocence. And then, just as quickly, the pain of losing those simple joys returned, sharp and biting, but tempered by the warmth of the present moment. Olivia finished her song and looked up, surprised to see him there. Their eyes met, and for a brief instant, the world seemed to pause. Lucas felt a stir in his chest, a sensation so foreign and powerful that it almost frightened him. He did not speak. Words would have ruined the magic of the moment. He simply looked, and something inside him shifted ever so slightly. He had not smiled. Not yet, but the edges of his cold, hardened expression saw. It was enough to make Olivia hesitate, sensing the strange warmth emanating from the man she had only just begun to know. As Lucas left the office that night, the city lights sparkling below, he felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Anticipation? He wondered what it meant, why a simple song could have stirred something so deep, and whether he was ready to let the walls he had built around himself crumble, even just a little. The world outside continued, indifferent and fast-paced. But Lucas's heart, long dormant, had begun to awaken. The man who had never smiled was no longer entirely untouchable. And somewhere in the depths of that awakening, a question lingered. Could a song, a melody, and the warmth of a kind heart be enough to bring him back to life? The answer, as yet, remained unknown, and that uncertainty carried a thrill he had not felt in 20 years. Lucas Reed woke the next morning feeling a strange tension he couldn't quite name. He had left the office late the night before, the city lights below the towering skyscraper twinkling like stars trapped in glass. But instead of the usual emptiness, he carried with him a melody that refused to leave his mind. Olivia's song, the soft, gentle tune she had hummed, as she organized papers, lingered in his thoughts, like a persistent echo. He tried to focus on emails, reports, and numbers, but each time, his mind wandered. The melody returned, insistent, teasing, and strangely comforting. For the first time in decades, Lucas noticed something that he had forgotten even existed. Curiosity about another person, and not just any person, but Olivia Bennett, the new secretary whose voice had managed to reach through the armor he had built around himself. The office was buzzing with activity, the kind of controlled chaos that Lucas had orchestrated over the years. Employees moved with precision, papers were passed, phones rang, and computers hummed. Yet, amidst the usual noise, Lucas's eyes found Olivia immediately. She was standing by the large window, papers in hand, humming again. It was a quiet, almost accidental hum, the kind that felt unimportant, yet held power. Lucas leaned back in his chair, pretending to examine a report, but his eyes betrayed him. He watched her move, the way her fingers brushed over the papers, how she occasionally smiled at some private thought. There was something in her simplicity, in her ease, that contrasted so sharply with his world of deadlines and cold efficiency. And yet, the melody she created carried a weight he hadn't anticipated, light, airy, yet deeply affecting. It stirred in him memories he had buried long ago, moments of happiness and sorrow, love and loss, laughter and warmth. Lucas's assistant, a young man named Richard, approached with a stack of files. But Lucas waved him away without looking up. He didn't need the reports. Not today. Today, all he needed was to understand the strange pull he felt whenever Olivia sang. Richard hesitated for a moment, sensing the unusual mood in the usually unreadable CEO, then retreated quietly. Lucas, left alone, allowed himself to listen, focusing entirely on the faint melody that floated across the office. Each note, simple yet precise, resonated deep inside him. He felt a tug, a sensation so unfamiliar that he almost stood and left the office as if he could not trust himself with the sudden vulnerability he felt. He had spent 20 years avoiding emotions, yet here they were, breaking through his carefully constructed walls, and the only culprit was a young woman with a gentle voice and a soft smile. The day passed slowly, each hour marked not by meetings or reports, but by moments when Lucas found himself stealing glances at Olivia. She worked diligently, moving from desk to desk, helping employees, organizing files, humming the same soft tune whenever she felt comfortable. Other employees noticed Lucas's attention as well. Whispers began to circulate quietly across the office floor. Questions and speculations about the cold, unyielding CEO who was now watching the new secretary more than anyone else. Some laughed nervously, some shook their heads, and a few speculated openly. Has Lucas read changed? But Lucas didn't care about the whispers. All that mattered was the song, the melody, and the inexplicable warmth it brought into his chest. During lunch, Lucas found himself alone in the office, a rare occurrence. He poured a cup of black coffee, the bitter liquid doing nothing to calm the strange flutter in his chest. He remembered a song from his childhood, one his mother had sung to him when he was young. It had been long forgotten, buried under the weight of responsibility, ambition, and loss. Yet, as he hummed the melody silently to himself, he realized with a shock that Olivia's song mirrored it almost perfectly. His mother's voice, long gone, and Olivia's humming converged in his memory, creating a bridge between past and present, loss and awakening. Lucas's eyes grew misty for a fleeting moment, but he quickly looked away, unwilling to let anyone, especially himself, see weakness. He had survived by being strong, detached, and unfeeling. Now for the first time in 20 years, he felt the walls crumble. The next afternoon brought an unexpected twist. Olivia, unaware of the effect her singing had on Lucas, decided to play a short tune on a small keyboard she kept in her desk drawer. The sound was light, playful, yet hauntingly beautiful. Lucas, who had been reviewing contracts, stopped mid-sentence. He listened, leaning back in his chair, captivated. His hands, usually steady and cold, twitched as if wanting to reach out, yet fear held him back. The employees around them continued their work, oblivious to the tension building silently in the room. Lucas's heart raced not with anger, nor with excitement in the usual sense, but with something far more terrifying, vulnerability. He did not know how to feel this way. He had controlled every aspect of his life for 20 years. And now, a simple song had thrown him into uncertainty, into a realm of emotion he had long avoided. By evening, Lucas found himself wandering into the empty office hallways, drawn by the sound of Olivia's voice. She was humming again, moving with her usual grace as she tidied the office before leaving. He stood in the shadows, watching, listening, feeling the warmth of the melody seep into him. His mind was a storm of questions. Why did this simple song affect him so profoundly? Why did he feel a connection to someone he barely knew? Could it be hope? The sensation was thrilling and terrifying all at once, leaving him restless as he finally retreated to his office, closing the door behind him. That night, for the first time in decades, Lucas lay awake in his luxurious penthouse apartment, thinking not of profit margins or company growth, but of a simple melody, a soft voice, and the inexplicable longing it stirred inside him. The following days continued in a similar pattern. Lucas became obsessed with her singing, yet he never acknowledged it publicly. He started noticing the smallest details about Olivia, the way her hair caught the light in the morning, the tilt of her head when she hummed, the gentle way she interacted with others, always kind, never judgmental. Each day, the pull grew stronger, drawing him closer, breaking down the icy barriers he had built over decades. He felt emotions he could not name, a mixture of nostalgia, curiosity, admiration, and something deeper, something that frightened him with its intensity. Lucas Reed, the man who had not smiled in 20 years, was beginning to feel alive again, and it terrified him. One evening, as the office emptied and the city lights reflected off the glass walls, Olivia hummed the song once more. Lucas, unable to resist, stepped closer than he had ever dared. He didn't speak. He only listened, letting the melody fill the empty spaces inside him. She looked up, startled, her eyes meeting his. In that moment, Lucas realized that this was more than just a song. It was a bridge, a connection, a spark of life he had thought lost forever. And though he did not smile, a subtle change crossed his face, a flicker of warmth, a hint of softness, enough for Olivia to sense that something extraordinary was happening. Inside, the man who had never smiled, as Lucas finally left the office that night, the city glittering beneath him, he felt something he had not felt in decades. Anticipation, curiosity, and the strange, thrilling possibility that his life could change. The melody followed him home, a constant companion in his mind, teasing, comforting, and awakening. For the first time in 20 years, Lucas Reed wondered not about work, wealth, or reputation, but about something far more fragile and powerful. The possibility of connection, the magic of a song, and the hint of a smile that might, one day, reach his lips. And in that quiet anticipation, the first real stirrings of emotion began, as Lucas felt himself moving, ever so slowly, toward a future that promised warmth, vulnerability, and perhaps, love. The next morning, Lucas Reed awoke before dawn, a restless unease tugging at him from deep within. He lay in his expansive, cold penthouse, the city below glittering like 1,000 tiny fires. Yet his mind was elsewhere, consumed by a single, persistent thought: Olivia Bennett. He could no longer deny it. Her voice, the gentle melody she sang as if the world held no shadows, had lodged itself firmly in his mind. Even in sleep, her tune had whispered to him, threading through the quiet of his dreams, carrying with it memories he had long tried to suppress. He remembered a voice from his childhood, soft, warm, and full of love, and, for the first time in 20 years, Lucas allowed himself to wonder why such a simple melody could awaken such powerful, unbidden emotions. By the time he arrived at the office, the city was alive with morning bustle, cars honking, and people rushing to their jobs, but Lucas moved through it as though in a trance. He walked the familiar corridors of his company headquarters, noting the polished floors, the precise arrangement of furniture, the employees scuttling about in practiced routine. Yet none of this mattered. His eyes were searching, unconsciously, drawn toward Olivier, who had already arrived at her desk. She hummed softly as she arranged documents, a simple, almost playful tune that made Lucas pause in his stride. It was the same song from yesterday, but today it carried something different, something more familiar. His heart pounded, a strange heat rising in his chest, as if recognizing a connection he had long forgotten. Curiosity gnawed at him, a sensation so foreign that he almost For decades, Lucas had been ruled by logic, strategy, and control. Emotion was dangerous, weakness manifest. Yet here, in the hum of her voice, he felt something stirring that he could not name it, echoed from a time before ambition, before power, before isolation. It was a memory wrapped in melody, tugging at the edges of his consciousness. With deliberate care, Lucas approached his office window, glancing at the skyline, and allowed himself a moment to remember. There had been laughter in his childhood, home, music in the evenings, warmth in the arms of people who cared. That warmth had been ripped away by circumstance, responsibility, and loss, leaving behind a man who had perfected the art of solitude. And now, here was Olivia, innocent and unaware, breaking through the barriers of decades with a song. He could not resist it any longer. Lucas lingered at her desk under the guise of reviewing reports, but in truth, he was listening. Each note, each gentle inflection, seemed to penetrate deeper into the fortress of his heart. He noticed the way her fingers danced over papers as she hummed, the tilt of her head as she smiled absent-mindedly, and the light in her eyes that reflected something he had long forgotten. Hope. His chest tightened with a strange mixture of longing and fear. He had been untouchable, unfeeling, and yet here, for the first time in 20 years, he was vulnerable. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Later that afternoon, Lucas wandered into the office library, ostensibly to review company files, but in truth, to reflect on the strange emotions swirling within him. He found himself drawn to an old photograph tucked between the pages of a ledger, a family picture from his childhood. His mother, smiling softly, a songbook in hand. His father, standing stiffly beside her. And a young Lucas, no more than 6 years old, beaming in a rare, unrestrained moment of joy. He traced the edges of the photograph with a finger, the memory of his mother's voice washing over him in vivid waves. And then it struck him: the melody Olivia sang, gentle, playful, yet full of warmth, was the same as the one his mother had sung to him all those years ago. His breath caught, a sharp, sudden intake, and for the first time in decades, he felt the sting of nostalgia, of longing, of lost time. The discovery shook him more than he expected. How could a stranger, a woman he had barely spoken to, hold the key to memories he had buried so deeply? His mind raced, grappling with questions and emotions he could not contain. He tried to focus on work, but every spreadsheet, every contract, every report blurred before his eyes. He realized, with a start, that he was watching Olivia even now, through the glass panel that separated their workspaces. She was humming again, arranging files, utterly unaware of the turmoil she had unleashed. In him, Lucas's chest tightened as he struggled to reconcile this strange connection with his usual detachment. By midweek, the connection deepened in subtle, undeniable ways. Lucas found himself arriving at the office earlier than usual, not for business, but to catch a glimpse of her, to hear the song that haunted him. He noticed small things that no one else would, the way she tilted her head as she hummed, the gentle sway of her hair in the sunlight, the soft smile that appeared without conscious thought. These moments, insignificant to others, were profound. He felt his walls crack, brick by brick, the cold fortress he had built around his heart showing signs of vulnerability he had never imagined possible. And yet, he did not act. He observed, listened, and wondered, too cautious, too uncertain, too aware of the fragile balance between curiosity and obsession. One evening, Lucas found himself standing outside her office door, hesitant, unsure whether to enter. The office was nearly empty, shadows stretching across the polished floors. He could hear her humming softly, the notes drifting through the air, light and free. It was intoxicating, impossible to resist. For a long moment, he simply listened, hidden in the doorway, letting the melody wash over him, stirring memories, longing, and an unspoken ache. Olivia, unaware, finished her work, packing her bags slowly, humming the final notes. As she looked up, Lucas stepped out, not speaking, only letting their eyes meet. In that silent exchange, something shifted, a current running between them that neither could deny. He did not smile, not yet, but a flicker of recognition, a hint of something unspoken, passed between them. The days that followed were a delicate dance. Lucas became more attentive, more aware of Olivia, though always cautious. He observed her interactions with colleagues, noting her kindness, patience, and subtle humor. She treated everyone with warmth, never seeking attention, never demanding recognition. It was the opposite of the corporate coldness he had enforced for years, and he found himself inexplicably drawn to it. The song became a constant in his mind, a tether connecting past to present, childhood innocence to adult longing. Each note she sang reminded him of who he had been, who he could have been, and perhaps who he might still become. Lucas's employees noticed a subtle shift as well. The man who had been untouchable, aloof, and severe now lingered near Olivia's desk, watched her quietly, and occasionally softened his gaze when she smiled. Whispers circulated once more. Has Lucas read? Changed? Could it be possible? Yet no one dared approach, for the change was mysterious, almost frightening in its intensity. Lucas did not care. He had not smiled, not yet, but the walls around his heart had begun to crumble, brick by brick, note by note, song by song. One late evening, as the office emptied and the city lights glittered like distant stars, Lucas found himself standing outside the window of her office. Olivia hummed softly, organizing papers, unaware of his presence. He leaned against the doorframe, listening, letting the melody carry him through a flood of memories and emotions. This time, he did not hide. He allowed himself to feel the pull, the connection, the strange recognition that hummed in every note. He thought of his mother, of his childhood, of laughter and warmth long lost. He realized that this connection, sparked by a simple song, might be the beginning of something that could change everything. For the first time, Lucas read aloud himself to imagine a world beyond power, beyond wealth, beyond the cold efficiency that had defined him for 2 decades. He imagined a world where he could feel again, laugh again, and perhaps, just perhaps, smile. The thought terrified him as much as it thrilled him. He did not yet know what the future held, but he knew one thing with absolute clarity. Olivia Bennett, with her gentle melody and radiant spirit, had reached him in a way no one had in 20 years. And as he watched her hum the final notes and pack her things, their eyes met once more, lingering, unspoken. A secret connection forming that neither could yet name, but both would feel, deeply, forever. The office was alive with tension that morning, the kind of energy that came from anticipation and expectation. Today was important a board meeting that could change the trajectory of the company. With investors flying in from across the country, Lucas Reed, as usual, arrived early, walking through the corridors with his trademark precision. Sharp gray eyes scanning the office as if nothing could escape his attention. But today, something was different. He felt it in the air, in the flutter of his chest that refused to be dismissed. The thought of Olivia Bennett humming in the office, moving about with calm confidence, filled him with a strange, unnameable feeling. He had tried to suppress it, tried to push it aside, but he could no longer ignore the pull she had over him. The melody she carried with her lingered in his mind like smoke from a candle, curling around his thoughts. And he realized with a start that he would notice every little detail about her today, whether he wanted to or not. The morning began with the usual flurry of activity. Employees rushed to prepare documents, coordinate schedules, and finalize presentations. Lucas, however, seemed distracted, observing Olivia with subtle intensity as she moved gracefully from desk to desk, assisting colleagues, organizing papers, and humming softly under her breath. The tune was light, almost playful, yet carried an undertone of something deeper, something familiar that tugged at Lucas's long-locked heart. He realized that in her presence, he was no longer merely an observer of the corporate world. He was emotionally entangled, whether he wanted to be or not. His mind raced with questions he had not faced in decades. Why did her song affect him so profoundly? Why did he feel drawn to her warmth, her kindness, her subtle strength? Could it be possible that after 20 years of cold detachment, he was beginning to feel something resembling emotion again? The boardroom meeting was called to order promptly at 9 p.m. Investors and senior executives filled the room, all eyes on Lucas as he entered, commanding attention without uttering a word. He took his usual seat at the head of the polished oak table, exuding the cold, controlled authority that had defined him for decades. Reports were presented, charts displayed, and financial analysis reviewed. Lucas listened intently, his eyes scanning the documents, his mind processing every detail with perfect efficiency. Yet, beneath the surface, his attention kept returning to Olivia. She had been asked unexpectedly to present a portion of the report, a responsibility she had accepted without hesitation or fear. The knowledge that she would stand before the board, in front of him in a room full of powerful executives, made Lucas's chest tighten in a way that was both thrilling and frightening. When Olivia stepped forward, Lucas observed silently. She moved with a quiet confidence, her eyes meeting those of each person in the room, her voice calm and steady. As she spoke, her hands gestured naturally, her posture composed. Yet her soft hum occasionally escaped as she glanced at her notes. Lucas felt an unfamiliar sensation, pride, admiration, and something more. Something tender and protective that he had never experienced before. The board members, too, were captivated. Her presentation was clear, organized, and precise, yet carried a warmth and charm that contrasted sharply with the usual sterile corporate atmosphere. Lucas found himself caught between admiration and disbelief. Here was a young woman, unassuming, almost delicate in appearance, commanding respect and attention in a way that reminded him of what he had long considered impossible human connection. During a brief moment of levity, Olivier made a small, unintentional mistake. A chart was misaligned, a figure misstated, and for a split second, the room tensed. But before panic could take hold, she corrected herself, smiling lightly, her voice carrying a hint of humor that was entirely natural, unforced. And then, without thinking, Lucas laughed. Not a full laugh, not yet, but a quiet, almost inaudible chuckle that startled even him. It was the first time in 20 years that anyone had heard any sound resembling joy from him, and the effect was immediate. Olivia paused, her eyes flicking toward him, and a tiny, knowing smile curved her lips. She did not comment, but Lucas noticed a warmth spreading through him that was entirely unfamiliar. The employees, sensing the change, exchanged subtle glances, wondering if the unshakable CEO had begun to show signs of humanity. The meeting continued, but Lucas's attention wavered. He found himself watching Olivia, noting the subtle gestures she made, the confidence in her voice, the warmth in her interactions with others. Each note she hummed, each small smile, seemed to chip away at the walls he had built around himself. He realized, with a mix of fear and exhilaration, that he was no longer in control. The emotions he had long suppressed were surfacing, and they were not to be denied. He felt his pulse quicken, a strange heat in his chest that he had not felt in decades. And he knew that this was only the beginning. After the meeting, Lucas returned to his office, ostensibly to review notes. But in truth, he could not focus on anything but Olivia. Shia had returned to her desk, organizing files with her usual grace, humming softly under her breath. Lucas leaned against the doorframe, silent and watchful, observing the small, simple moments that seemed to carry the weight of significance. He noticed the tilt of her head, the light in her eyes, the way her hands moved with precision and care. Each detail, ordinary to anyone else, felt extraordinary to him. He realized, with startling clarity, that he had never truly seen anyone this way before. Not employees, not colleagues, not anyone. There was something pure and untainted in her presence, a force that was drawing him out of the shadows of his own life, whether he wanted it or not. The days that followed were a delicate dance of observation and restraint. Lucas found himself lingering near her desk under various pretenses, listening quietly as she hummed, noting the small kindnesses she offered to colleagues, and marveling at her effortless charm. He became increasingly aware of the internal struggle within him, the desire to connect, to speak, to acknowledge the emotions stirring in his chest. and the equally strong fear of vulnerability, of losing control, of showing a weakness that he had spent 20 years perfecting was a tension he had never known before, and had left him restless, agitated, yet strangely alive. One evening, as the office emptied and the city outside glittered under the lights, Lucas remained behind, ostensibly to finish work. He found Olivia humming softly, unaware of his presence, as she tidied the office for the night. The melody, gentle and familiar, filled the space around him, wrapping around him like a memory long forgotten. He watched her, mesmerized, feeling an ache in his chest that he could neither name nor resist. He finished her song, noticing him, for the first time, and their eyes met. In that silent moment, a current passed between them, unspoken, undeniable, electric. Lucas felt the stirrings of emotion more powerfully than ever before, a mix of admiration, longing, and something deeper. Something that terrified him with its intensity. As he left the office that night, the melody still ringing in his mind, Lucas realized that the unshakable, unyielding CEO had changed, subtly but irrevocably. The walls he had built around his heart were beginning to crack, the cold armor of detachment giving way to warmth, connection, and the faintest glimmer of vulnerability. And in that moment, he understood a truth that both thrilled and frightened him. Olivia Bennett had done what no one else had managed in 20 years. She had made him laugh, even if quietly, and in doing so, had begun to teach him how to feel. Once more, the anticipation of the days to come filled him with a restless energy he had not known in decades. He wondered what the future held, what challenges and emotions lay ahead, and whether he could allow himself to embrace the feelings. Olivia had awakened. He did not yet smile, not fully, but the edges of his stern, unyielding expression had softened. Something new had begun, a story that was unfolding in the quiet moments of melody, glances, and unspoken connection. Lucas Reed, the man who had not smiled in 20 years, was on the brink of transformation, and the journey was only beginning. The office was quiet that evening, almost eerily so, the hum of computers and distant city sounds fading as employees filed out, one by one. Lucas Reed remained behind, seated at his desk under the glow of the desk lamp, his sharp gray eyes scanning reports he could barely focus on. His mind was elsewhere, occupied entirely by one thought: Olivia Bennett. She had stayed behind as well, tidying up, humming softly as she worked. The melody was faint, gentle, and almost trembling, as if the music itself carried an emotion too delicate for words. Lucas leaned back in his chair, heart pounding in a way it hadn't in decades. He was drawn to her presence, to the sound of her voice, to the warmth she carried effortlessly. And he knew that he could no longer ignore the feelings that had begun to stir within him. He rose quietly and walked toward the faint sound, moving slowly as if approaching a fragile creature, afraid that any sudden movement might break the spell. Olivia was arranging a stack of files, her eyes focused, humming a tune that seemed to echo through the empty office. Filling the space was something Lucas could not name but recognized instinctively: comfort, nostalgia, and a strange, aching longing. He paused in the doorway, watching her, captivated. She did not see him at first, lost in her work, and he allowed himself to simply observe, to feel the warmth of her presence and the pull of the melody that seemed to reach into his very soul. As she hummed, Lucas's mind drifted, memories surfacing unbidden. He remembered his mother, long gone, singing to him as a child, her voice carrying softness, laughter, and unconditional love. He remembered his father, distant yet proud. Moments of happiness that had seemed ordinary at the time but now felt like treasures lost forever. And he realized, with a sudden, almost painful clarity, that Olivia's song was the bridge to those memories, the key to emotions he had locked away for 20 years. He felt his chest tighten, a strange ache, a mixture of longing and fear. He had spent decades avoiding vulnerability, and now it was being forced upon him by something as simple, as human, as a melody and a smile. Olivia finally noticed him, her eyes meeting his across the room. For a moment, she froze, a soft flush rising to her cheeks, but she did not stop singing. Instead, she gave him a small, shy smile, as if acknowledging a shared secret that had not yet been spoken. Lucas's heart skipped, and he realized that he had been holding his breath. He stepped closer, unsure whether to speak, unsure of what words could possibly convey the torrent of emotions building within him. He did not need words. The melody spoke for him, carried him, and in that quiet, suspended moment, something shifted. He felt the walls he had spent 20 years constructing crumble, brick by brick, note by note. For the first time, Lucas allowed himself to feel fully hope, admiration, and a fragile, unguarded warmth directed entirely at Olivia. He watched her, noticing the little details that no one else would: the curve of her lips as she hummed, the way her hands moved over the papers, the soft light in her eyes reflecting something tender and genuine. And then, Almost involuntarily, a small, hesitant smile appeared on his lips. It was not a full smile, not yet, but enough to surprise him, enough to make Olivia pause and look directly at him. She blinked, a mix of curiosity and delight in her expression, as if recognizing that something extraordinary had just happened. Lucas felt a rush of conflicting emotions: fear at the vulnerability he was experiencing, excitement at the connection he had longed for without realizing it, and an almost dizzying thrill at the possibility that this moment could change everything. He had spent 2 decades as a man, untouchable, cold, and unfeeling. And now, in the quiet of an empty office, a young woman with a gentle voice had managed to reach him in ways no one else ever could. He realized, with a clarity that both exhilarated and terrified him, that he was on the precipice of something he had never allowed himself to consider love. The evening stretched on, in a delicate, unspoken intimacy. Olivia hummed another soft tune, one slightly slower, more introspective. And Lucas listened, entranced. Each note seemed to carry a piece of her soul, and he felt it resonate deep within him. He moved closer, careful not to startle her, until he stood beside her desk, the soft lamplight casting a glow across her face. She glanced at him, a slight smile playing on her lips, and Lucas felt a warmth spread through him that he had thought impossible. The air between them was charged, electric, yet gentle, as if the office itself had fallen into a private bubble where only the two of them existed. Lucas, Olivia said softly, her voice hesitant but steady. "You're still here? I couldn't leave," he replied, his own voice low, almost unfamiliar to him. He realized with a start that speaking to her directly, openly, was both thrilling and terrifying. Words, so often used as weapons or shields, were inadequate here. They could not capture the depth of the feelings rising within him. Instead, he let his presence speak, the subtle shift in his posture, the warmth in his eyes, and the almost imperceptible curve of his lips convey what words could not. Olivia studied him for a moment, sensing the change, sensing the unspoken truth that he had never allowed anyone to see. She smiled softly, the corners of her eyes crinkling slightly, and returned to her humming, as if inviting him into her world without saying a word. Lucas felt a rush of relief and longing simultaneously. He realized that this was a turning point, a moment that would linger in his memory forever. The man who had not smiled in 20 years was beginning to open himself to the possibility of joy, connection, and perhaps love. The rest of the evening passed in quiet companionship, broken only by the soft sound of papers being organized and the occasional hum of melody. Lucas remained nearby, listening, watching, feeling the strange, exhilarating vulnerability of caring so deeply for someone in such a short span of time. The connection he felt was unlike anything he had ever experienced, was immediate, electric, and undeniable. And though he did not yet fully understand the depth of his feelings, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Olivia Bennet had reached him in a way no one else ever could, and he would never be the same again. As the night drew to a close, Lucas walked Olivia to the elevator, the soft glow of the building lights casting long shadows across the floor. They stood in silence for a moment, the hum of the city below mixing with the lingering melody in the office. He looked at her, heart pounding, feeling a vulnerability that both thrilled and frightened him. Then, almost instinctively, he smiled, again not fully, but a little more than before, a small, tentative curve of his lips that carried the weight of 20 years of solitude and longing. Olivia's eyes widened slightly, a soft gasp escaping her, and she returned the smile, gentle and encouraging, as if silently acknowledging the change she had inspired. When the elevator doors closed, Lucas felt a strange emptiness, a longing for the evening to continue, for the melody to persist, for the connection to remain tangible. But he also felt a sense of hope, fragile yet undeniable, that this was only the beginning. The man who had never smiled, who had lived for decades in cold isolation, was beginning to awaken. And somewhere deep within him, he knew that the journey ahead would be challenging, uncertain, and full of emotion, but it would also be filled with warmth, laughter, and perhaps love. As he returned to his office, alone in the quiet glow of the night, Lucas allowed himself a final, deep breath, letting the lingering melody fill the empty spaces within him. He did not yet know what the future held, but he knew that a change had begun, subtle, profound, and irreversible. Olivia Bennet had sung a song that reached beyond notes and melody. She had sung a song that touched his soul, awakened his heart, and began the delicate process of healing a man who had not smiled in 20 years. And in that quiet moment, Lucas read, the unshakable, untouchable CEO, felt something new and terrifying stir within him, the first flicker of vulnerability, the first hint of love, and the first true recognition that life, music, and connection were more powerful than power, wealth, or solitude. The song would continue to echo in his heart long after the office was empty, a gentle reminder that even the coldest hearts could be touched, and that even the most guarded souls could be awakened. The days following that evening were different, almost imperceptibly at first, but Lucas Reed felt the change in every part of his life. He walked through the corridors of the office with a new awareness, noticing things he had never cared about. Before the laughter of employees, the soft hum of printers, the way sunlight fell across the polished floors, and above all, he noticed Olivia Bennett. She was everywhere in his thoughts, in his memories, and in the spaces between his carefully ordered days. He tried to remain composed, to act as he had for 20 years, but every glance at her, every soft note of her humming, reminded him that he was no longer untouchable, no longer entirely in control of his emotions. It started with small moments of words that had previously felt unnecessary. Lucas would linger near her desk longer than required, offering instructions that were actually questions. Observing her reactions, noting her subtle smiles and attentive gestures. Olivia noticed these changes, though she did not comment directly. There was a tension between them, unspoken, yet unmistakable. A quiet recognition that something significant was unfolding. She caught his eyes more often, a faint blush on her cheeks when their gazes met. Lucas felt a flutter in his chest that was completely foreign, a warmth that threatened to overwhelm his usual composure. One afternoon, Lucas found himself walking toward her desk, documents in hand, but without any urgency to deliver them. He wanted to speak to her, to say something meaningful, yet the words eluded him. Olivia was humming softly, arranging files, entirely unaware of the storm of emotions swirling in the man standing silently before her. Her melody was gentle, playful, yet carried a depth that drew him closer, making him forget the carefully constructed boundaries he had relied on for decades. He clicked his throat, a sound that made Olivia pause, mid-note. "Lucas?" she asked softly, looking up, curious. "Yes," he replied, his voice low, almost unsure, though he tried to mask it with authority. "Do you need any help with these reports?" She shook her head, smiling faintly. "No, I've got 'em, but thank you." Her voice was soft, genuine, carrying the warmth that had begun to unravel the carefully maintained armor around his heart. He nodded, feeling a pang of something he could not name. Pride? Desire? Hope? Perhaps all three. The office grew quieter as the afternoon wore on. Lucas lingered, unable to leave, drawn inexplicably to her presence. He watched as Olivia hummed another tune, one slower and more introspective than usual, and felt the melody echoing through his memory, recalling fragments of his childhood and moments of long-lost happiness. He realized with a start that he wanted to know more about her, not just her work, not just her song, but her thoughts, her dreams, the person she was beyond the desk and files. It was a terrifying notion, one he had never considered for anyone, but now it was insistent, impossible to ignore. That evening, Lucas found himself standing by the office window, the city lights sprawling below, glittering like stars trapped in glass. Olivia had finished her tasks and was gathering her things, humming softly as she did. He hesitated, then walked toward her, unsure whether to speak or simply let the moment linger in silence. "You stay late often," he said finally, his voice low, almost conversational, startling both himself and her. But Olivia looked up, slightly surprised, then smiled. "Sometimes, it's quieter this way. I can finish my work without interruptions." Lucas nodded, feeling a rare connection in the simplicity of her words. "I understand." He paused, uncertain, then added, "You play beautifully." His words were simple, lacking the usual precision of his speech, but they were sincere, carrying the weight of a truth he had only recently acknowledged. Olivia's eyes softened, and she stepped closer, almost imperceptibly, a silent invitation of trust. "Thank you," she said. I enjoy it. It helps me focus." Her voice carried a vulnerability that Lucas found both comforting and alarming. For decades, he had avoided vulnerability, both in himself and in others, and now he felt it in full force. The pull between them was undeniable, a subtle current of emotion, respect, and something tender that neither dared speak aloud. Over the next few days, their interactions grew more natural, less formal. Lucas would occasionally hum along quietly, with her, a small gesture that startled him with its intimacy. He noticed details he had never cared about before, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the small, thoughtful gestures she made for colleagues, the way her laughter, quiet and unassuming, filled the room with a light that contrasted so sharply with his usual darkness. Olivia, in turn, began to sense his attention, the way he observed her, not with authority or judgment, but with something deeper, something genuine. Their connection was subtle but undeniable, growing with every shared glance, every unspoken understanding, every soft note of melody. One late evening, Lucas invited Olivia to stay after work under the pretense of reviewing some company files. The office was empty, the quiet only broken by the soft hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of the city. Olivia hummed softly as she worked, and Lucas found himself unable to focus on the papers before him. He watched her, captivated, feeling emotions he had long denied and avoided: aberration, longing, and an overwhelming desire to protect and cherish the presence she brought into his life. Lucas, Olivia said, glancing at him with a hint of curiosity in her eyes. Are you okay? You seem different. Lucas paused, the words striking him as both simple and profound. Different. Yes, he was different. He had spent 20 years as a man untouchable, isolated, and cold, and now, in her presence, he was unrecognizable even to himself. I am, he said finally, carefully, the tone lacking its usual rigidity. Just different. She smiled softly, a small, understanding gesture that carried more weight than words ever could. I'm glad, she said quietly. You deserve to feel. Lucas felt the warmth of her words seep into him, embalmed for decades of emotional cold. He realized that this connection, fragile yet undeniable, was something he could not walk away from. It was not just her song, her melody, or her kindness. It was the way she made him feel alive, vulnerable, and human again. And he wanted it more than he had ever wanted anything before. In the following weeks, the bond between them grew stronger. Lucas found reasons to linger near her desk, to share quiet moments, to observe her in the small, intimate rituals of office life. Olivia, in turn, began to recognize his subtle shifts, the small smiles, the glances that lingered too long, the quiet attentiveness that spoke volumes. They shared jokes, small stories, and quiet conversations that became the highlight of Lucas's days. Each interaction chipped away at the walls he had spent decades building, leaving behind a man slowly, painfully, but beautifully transformed. And yet, tension remained, a delicate balance between desire and restraint. Lucas feared his own vulnerability, uncertain how to navigate the depth of feeling that Olivia had awakened in him. He feared rejection, misunderstanding, and the possibility that his carefully constructed world might crumble entirely. But with each passing day, with each shared smile and melody, he realized that the risk was worth it. Olivia had brought warmth, light, and the possibility of love into his life, and he could no longer ignore it. One quiet evening, as they left the office together, the city lights casting soft glows around them, Lucas felt a profound sense of anticipation. Their hands brushed lightly, almost accidentally, and he felt a spark, a current of emotion that left him breathless. Olivia looked at him, eyes soft, and for the first time, Lucas allowed himself to wonder, could this be love? Could he, the man who had not smiled in 20 years, truly open his heart and embrace the vulnerability, joy, and connection that she offered? The answer, though not yet spoken aloud, was becoming clearer with every glance, every melody, every shared moment. Lucas Reed was changing. The man who had once been untouchable, cold, and isolated was beginning to awaken, drawn inexorably toward a woman who had sung her way into his heart, who had shown him that life, music, and love were stronger than power, wealth, or solitude. And as they parted for the evening, a subtle, unspoken promise lingered in the air, promise of connection, intimacy, and the possibility that even the coldest hearts could learn to feel again. The office was unusually quiet that morning, the kind of silence that feels heavy with possibility. Lucas Reed arrived earlier than usual, a faint excitement stirring in him, unfamiliar but undeniable. He moved through the corridors with his usual precision, but his mind was elsewhere, consumed by thoughts of Olivia Bennett. The melody she hummed yesterday, soft and intimate, still lingered in his mind, echoing in the quiet spaces of his office. For the first time in 20 years, Lucas felt anticipation that had nothing to do with work or power. It was something entirely new, thrilling, and terrifying. The possibility of love. He found Olivia at her desk, already humming a gentle tune, the soft notes filling the empty office with warmth. She looked up, her eyes meeting his, and smiled. There was a spark in her gaze, playful yet knowing, as if she sensed the change within him. Lucas felt a flutter in his chest, a sensation so foreign yet exhilarating that he almost stopped walking. He wanted to speak, to tell her what he felt, but the words hovered, trapped by the vulnerability he had spent decades avoiding. Instead, he simply stood there, letting the music speak for him, letting the silence between them carry the weight of what he could not yet put into words. For several minutes, they remained like that, suspended in a delicate, unspoken tension. Lucas observed her the way she tilted her head slightly as she hummed, the softness in her eyes, the gentle curve of her lips. Every detail felt magnified, significant, as if the universe had slowed just to let him notice. He realized, with a mix of awe and fear that he had been alive in name only for 20 years. And now, in her presence, he was truly, fully awake. Finally, Lucas spoke, his voice low but steady. "Olivia, I need to tell you something." She paused, a soft, encouraging smile on her lips. Yes, he hesitated, the words weighing heavily on him. For 2 decades, he had kept his emotions locked away, hiding behind power, authority, and cold efficiency. Now, every instinct screamed at him to remain cautious, but every part of his being demanded honesty. I've spent 20 years without really feeling, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. And then, you sang? And somehow, something changed. I don't know how to explain it, but I feel things I haven't felt in decades, and it's because of you. Olivia blinked, startled, but she did not look away. Her eyes softened, warm and gentle, reflecting the sincerity in his words. Lucas, he said softly. I didn't know. I didn't either, he replied quickly. Not until I heard you. Not until I saw you. I thought I was untouchable. I thought I had no need for anyone but you. You changed everything. And he paused, struggling for words. I don't want to hide anymore. I don't want to be the man I was for 20 years. I want to feel. And I want to feel it with you. For the first time, Lucas allowed himself to truly look at her, really see her, without pretense or caution. His chest tightened, fear and hope mingling in a heady, dizzying combination. Olivia took a step closer, the soft hum of the office blending with the pounding of his heart. She reached out gently, her hand brushing against his arm, a small, deliberate gesture that sent warmth rushing through him. Lucas, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. I've felt something too. I've noticed you, the way you watch me, care about me. It's different, and I like it. I like you. The words struck him with the force of a revelation, a sudden, brilliant clarity. For 20 years, Lucas had lived in solitude, believing he was unchangeable, untouchable, beyond love. And now, here was the woman who had sung her way into his life, the melody in her voice entwined with the song of his heart. Confessing that she felt the same, something broke inside him, then a damn long held, and for the first time in decades. Lucas Reed smiled, not a small, hesitant curve of the lips, but a full, radiant smile that reached his eyes, softening the stern lines of his face. It was a smile that carried years of longing, pain, and isolation, now finally freed by the music, kindness, and presence of the woman standing before him. Olivia's eyes widened in delight, a soft laugh escaping her as she saw the transformation in him. Your smile, she said, almost breathless. I've never seen it before. Lucas chuckled softly, a sound rich and warm, feeling lighter than he had in years. Neither have I, he admitted. I didn't think I could. And in that moment, the office, the city, the world outside, all of it faded away. There was only the two of them, the lingering melody of her song, and the profound connection they shared. Lucas reached out, gently taking her hand, holding it with a reverence that spoke of newfound vulnerability, trust, and hope. For hours, they spoke quietly, sharing stories, laughter, and small confessions. Lucas discovered the intricacies of Olivia's world, her dreams, her fears, the moments that made her smile, and the moments that made her hesitate. And Olivia discovered the man behind the legend, the CEO who had seemed untouchable, cold, and severe, yet who possessed a depth of emotion, thoughtfulness, and longing she could not have imagined. As the evening waned and the office lights dimmed, Lucas realized that he had crossed a threshold. He had allowed himself to feel, to hope, to trust, and to love. He had smiled fully, openly. And with that smile came a promise to never retreat into the cold isolation of the past. A promise to embrace life, connection, and the extraordinary woman who had sung him awake. Before leaving, Lucas gently brushed a strand of hair from Olivia's face, his hand lingering just long enough to convey warmth and tenderness. Thank you, he whispered, his voice filled with emotion. For everything. Olivia smiled softly, her eyes glistening with unspoken understanding. No, Lucas, thank you for letting yourself feel, for letting me in. And with that, they left the office together, hands intertwined, hearts aligned in a rhythm neither had anticipated but both recognized instantly. The city lights stretched before them, a sea of possibilities, and for the first time in decades, Lucas Reed felt truly alive, truly human, and truly undeniably in love. As they walked into the night, the melody of her song lingered in the air, a gentle, persistent reminder of the journey that had brought them here, from cold isolation and silence to warmth, connection, and a love that neither time nor fear could deny. Lucas's smile remained radiant and full, a symbol of the transformation he had undergone and the happiness that awaited him. And somewhere deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. The music, the connection, the love they would continue to grow, to challenge, and to sustain them, binding them together in a story that was theirs alone. A story that had begun with a simple song and a smile waiting to be found. Lucas Reed, the man who had never smiled in 20 years, had finally found the melody of his heart, and with it, the promise of a life filled with warmth, love, and unending possibility.